The glass-walled boardroom of Bennett Technologies fell silent as 6-year-old Isabella tugged on her mother's designer blazer during the most important investor meeting of the year. "Mommy," the little girl whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "why won't you marry the nice janitor? He makes you smile like Daddy used to." CEO Sophia Bennett's face flushed crimson as her daughter's innocent question echoed through the room, filled with venture capitalists. What those investors didn't know was that the nice janitor Isabella referred to was Alaric Beckett, a man who had just defeated the tech genius in chess using a strategy so brilliant it left her questioning everything she thought she knew about intelligence, worth, and love. 3 months earlier, Sophia had arrogantly challenged the quiet custodian to a game, never imagining that this humble man pushing a mop cart through her Silicon Valley headquarters was once considered the most promising chess prodigy in American history. His single devastating move had checkmated her in more ways than one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 32nd floor of Bennett Technologies hummed with the energy of innovation, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of downtown San Francisco's tech district. Sophia Bennett sat alone in her private office at 9:47 p.m., the city lights twinkling below like scattered diamonds against black velvet. At 33, she commanded one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence companies in Silicon Valley, her name frequently appearing on Forbes lists and conference keynotes. Tonight, however, she wasn't reviewing quarterly projections or debugging code. Instead, she hunched over an antique chess set that had belonged to her late father, studying a particularly complex endgame position. The soft knock on her glass door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called without looking up, assuming it was her assistant with the evening security briefings. Instead, she noticed the quiet shuffle of maintenance equipment and the distinctive squeak of wheels that needed oil. A tall man in navy blue coveralls entered, pushing his cleaning cart with practiced efficiency. Something about the way he moved, deliberate, economical, almost graceful, caught her attention. As he began emptying her wastebasket, his eyes fell on the chessboard. Sophia noticed him pause, his gaze lingering on the position with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than casual curiosity. The pieces were arranged in a complex middle game she'd been analyzing from a recent tournament broadcast. White, clearly losing despite having more material on the board. "Interesting position," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unexpected refinement that didn't match his work uniform. Sophia looked up for the first time, taking in his appearance. He was probably in his early 30s, with intelligent dark eyes and hands that, despite being calloused from manual labor, moved with surprising delicacy as he gestured toward the board. There was something about his posture, the way he carried himself, that suggested depths beneath the surface of his custodial role, feeling a mixture of loneliness and intellectual arrogance that often plagued her late-night work sessions. Sophia leaned back in her leather chair and made an offer that would change everything. "You play chess?" she asked, her tone carrying the casual condescension of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in every room. "I know the moves," he replied diplomatically. A reckless impulse seized her, born from too many hours of isolation and the peculiar confidence that came with professional success. "Tell you what," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Beat me in a game and I'll give you a job in our IT department. Triple your current salary, benefits, the whole package." The man stopped what he was doing and looked directly at her with those penetrating dark eyes. For a moment, Sophia felt as though he was seeing something in her that she wasn't sure she wanted exposed. "My name is Alaric Beckett," he said simply, "and I don't play for charity. If you're serious about this offer, then I'll play for real." The formality of his response, the dignity with which he carried himself despite their obvious difference in social status, should have given Sophia pause. Instead, it only reinforced her assumption that she was about to teach this working class man a valuable lesson about intellectual hierarchies. She'd been playing chess since she was 7 years old, had competed successfully throughout high school and college, and maintained her skills by playing online against masters during her rare free time. "I'm absolutely serious," she replied, already mentally composing the story. She'd tell her executive team about the amusing evening when she'd schooled the maintenance staff. "Shall we reset the board?" Alaric moved to wash his hands in the small sink near her office's coffee station, then returned to sit across from her with the same quiet confidence he'd displayed throughout their interaction. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his features more clearly, the way his eyes analyzed the board, the careful attention he paid to her every word, the subtle signs of education that his custodial uniform couldn't entirely disguise as. They arranged the pieces in their starting positions. Sophia felt a flutter of anticipation she hadn't experienced in months. When was the last time someone had surprised her, even in such a small way? Her life had become predictably successful, filled with board meetings and product launches and venture capital presentations, but empty of genuine intellectual challenge or human connection. "White or black?" she asked, gesturing to the pieces. "You choose," Alaric replied. "I'm comfortable with either." Sophia selected white, already planning an aggressive opening that would establish her dominance early and end the game quickly. She had investor calls scheduled for early morning and couldn't afford to spend all night on what should be a brief demonstration of superior skill and strategic thinking. "Before we begin," Alaric said, his voice carrying a note of seriousness that made her look up from the board, "I should mention that I have a 6-year-old daughter. If I do happen to win this game, the position you're offering would need to accommodate school schedules and occasional emergencies. I can't work overtime or travel extensively." The request was reasonable, even admirable in its honesty, but it only served to reinforce Sophia's confidence that she was dealing with someone whose priorities were fundamentally different from her own. A man with serious family responsibilities couldn't possibly have devoted the time necessary to develop genuinely challenging chess skills. She nodded sympathetically, already imagining how generous she'd be in defeat, perhaps offering him a modest promotion within the custodial department instead of the IT position she'd rashly promised. "Of course," she said. "Family comes first." "I understand completely." But as Alaric settled into his chair and placed his hands on the table, Sophia caught something in his expression that gave her the first hint that this evening might not unfold according to her expectations. There was a stillness about him, a centered quality that reminded her of professional athletes she'd watched preparing for important competitions. His breathing was controlled, his posture balanced, and when he looked at the chessboard, she saw the focused intensity of someone entering a familiar arena. "Your move," he said simply. The conference room felt smaller suddenly, as though his presence had somehow expanded to fill the space in ways she couldn't quite understand. Sophia pushed forward her king's pawn 2 squares, the most common opening move in chess, and settled back to watch how this interesting man would respond to her challenge. What she couldn't have known was that she just invited one of the most naturally gifted chess minds of his generation to demonstrate exactly why some games shouldn't be played casually, and why assumptions based on appearances could prove devastatingly wrong. Sophia Bennett's path to the corner office of Bennett Technologies had been carved through Silicon Valley's notoriously competitive landscape with the precision of a master algorithm. Born into an upper-middle-class family in Palo Alto, she'd grown up breathing the rarefied air of Stanford University's campus, where her father taught computer science and her mother worked as a patent attorney specializing in tech innovations. Excellence wasn't just expected in the Bennett household. It was assumed as natural as breathing. At 8 years old, while other youngsters were learning to ride bicycles, Sophia was already debugging simple code and solving logic puzzles that challenged high school students. Her parents, recognizing her exceptional aptitude, had enrolled her in advanced mathematics programs and computer camps that fed directly into the pipeline of tomorrow's tech leaders. Chess had been introduced as a tool for developing strategic thinking, and she'd excelled at it the way she excelled at everything else, through methodical study, relentless practice, and an unwavering belief in the superiority of analytical thinking over intuitive leaps. Stanford had been a natural choice for her undergraduate degree in computer science, followed by an MBA from Wharton that equipped her with the business acumen necessary to navigate corporate hierarchies. She'd cut her teeth at Google, then Facebook, learning the art of scaling technology platforms and managing teams of brilliant engineers who respected her technical competence even as they sometimes bristled at her demanding leadership style. The decision to launch Bennett Technologies at 28 had been calculated rather than impulsive. She'd identified a gap in the artificial intelligence market, specifically natural language processing applications for enterprise customer service, and had assembled a team of former colleagues who shared her vision of disrupting traditional call center operations. The company's growth had been meteoric, attracting $60 million in venture funding within 18 months and establishing Sophia as one of the youngest female CEOs in Silicon Valley's elite circles. But success had come at a cost that she was only beginning to understand. Her personal life had become a casualty of her professional ambitions, relationships withering under the pressure of 18-hour workdays and a single-minded focus on quarterly metrics. She told herself that love was a luxury she could afford later, once the company went public and she'd proven herself capable of building something lasting and significant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The loneliness, when she allowed herself to acknowledge it, felt like a physical ache in her chest. She filled the void with work, with strategic planning sessions that stretched past midnight, with the intellectual satisfaction of solving complex technical challenges. Chess had become her meditation, her escape from the endless demands of leadership and the constant pressure to maintain her company's explosive growth trajectory. Alaric Beckett inhabited a completely different universe, one measured not in stock options and board meetings, but in small victories and daily survival. His current life as a custodian at Bennett Technologies represented the culmination of choices that prioritized love over ambition, stability over recognition, the immediate needs of his daughter over the abstract promise of future success. Journey from promise to invisibility had begun 6 years earlier, with a phone call that shattered his carefully constructed world. Isabella's mother, a brilliant graduate student in international relations whom he'd met during his brief time at UC Berkeley, had died in a car accident on Highway 101 during a winter storm. At 27, Alaric had suddenly found himself solely responsible for a 6-month-old baby, whose needs were as immediate and uncompromising as they were completely foreign to his previous existence. His life before fatherhood had revolved around 64 squares and the infinite possibilities they contained. Chess had been more than a game. It was his language, his art form, his pathway to a future that promised intellectual fulfillment and financial security. Tournament victories had funded his education, and his rapid rise through the competitive ranks had attracted the attention of sponsors and coaches, who spoke confidently about grandmaster titles and international competitions. But Isabella's arrival had rewritten every equation in his life. Suddenly, tournament travel became impossible. Late-night training sessions had to accommodate diaper changes and feeding schedules. The intense focus required for high-level competition was constantly interrupted by the immediate demands of caring for a grieving, colicky infant who seemed to sense the profound disruption in her young world. The decision to step away from competitive chess hadn't been made in a single moment, but had evolved over months of missed tournaments and declining performance as his attention divided between the board and his daughter's needs. When Isabella developed severe ear infections that required specialized medical care, Alaric had made the final calculation that changed everything. Steady employment with health insurance was worth more than the uncertain income of professional chess. Bennett Technologies had hired him through a staffing agency that specialized in placing reliable, trustworthy employees in custodial and maintenance positions. The work was honest and necessary, if invisible to the executives who inhabited the upper floors of the gleaming downtown building. Alaric took pride in maintaining clean, pleasant work environments for the brilliant minds developing tomorrow's technologies, even as he sometimes felt like a ghost moving through their world. Isabella had grown into a precocious 6-year-old, whose bright curiosity and infectious laughter made every sacrifice worthwhile. She attended Oakwood Elementary, a diverse public school in the Richmond district where her father could afford the rent on their modest 2-bedroom apartment. Their evenings were spent on homework and simple dinners, weekend adventures to Golden Gate Park and the public library, bedtime stories that stretched longer than they should, because Alaric treasured these moments of pure connection with his daughter. The chessboard in their living room served as both decoration and reminder of the path not taken. Isabella had learned the basic moves, approaching the game with the same fearless creativity she brought to her artwork and storytelling. For her, chess was play rather than preparation, imagination rather than calculation, and watching her discover the joy in moving pieces across the board sometimes made Alaric wonder if he'd been taking the game too seriously during his competitive years. Money was always tight, but never desperate. They had enough for Isabella's needs, occasional treats, and the security that came with steady employment and decent health insurance. Alaric had learned to find satisfaction in small victories, a perfect cleaning job that went unnoticed, a smile from Isabella when he picked her up from school, the quiet pride of providing stability for someone he loved. More than his own life, he rarely thought about chess anymore, except during quiet moments when Isabella was asleep and he found himself studying positions from memory, analyzing games he'd played years earlier with the same precision that once made him one of the most promising young players in California. Those skills remained sharp through disuse, like muscle memory waiting for the right moment to resurface, but they belonged to a different person living a different life in what felt like a different world entirely. The evening he'd encountered Sophia Bennett studying her chess position, Alaric had recognized immediately both the complexity of the tactical puzzle she was attempting to solve and the profound loneliness that drove someone to work alone in an empty office building past 10 o'clock. Her casual challenge had awakened something in him that he'd thought was permanently dormant, not the desire to win exactly, but the deeper satisfaction of engaging with a worthy opponent across the battlefield of 64 squares. He'd accepted her offer not because he needed the money, though the salary increase would certainly transform Isabella's educational opportunities, but because he'd seen something in Sophia Bennett's eyes that he recognized from his own mirror during the loneliest moments of single parenthood. Hunger for genuine human connection disguised as professional confidence. The office felt charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the late hour or the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sophia studied the pristine chessboard between them, the pieces arranged in their eternal starting positions like soldiers awaiting battle commands. She'd played thousands of games in her life, but something about this particular match felt different, more consequential somehow, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. "I should probably warn you," she said with a confidence born from years of competitive success. "I don't lose often. I was ranked second in my college division, and I still play regularly against masters online." The statement was intended to give Alaric a graceful opportunity to reconsider, though privately she hoped he'd maintain his dignity and play the game through to its inevitable conclusion. Alaric nodded thoughtfully. his fingers tracing the edge of the board with surprising delicacy for hands that spent their days pushing mops and emptying trash cans. "I appreciate the warning," he replied. "It's always better to understand your opponent's strengths before the battle begins." His choice of words opponent rather than partner, battle rather than game should have alerted Sophia to the seriousness with which he approached their contest. Instead, she interpreted his formality as the nervousness of someone trying to maintain composure while facing a challenge beyond his actual capabilities. Sophia opened with her king's pawn, the most fundamental move in chess, controlling the center squares and preparing to develop her pieces with maximum efficiency. It was a conservative choice that reflected her methodical approach to both chess and business. Establish control, build advantages incrementally, and execute winning strategies through careful planning rather than risky innovation. Alaric responded immediately with his own king's pawn, creating the classic symmetrical opening that had been played by masters for centuries. But something in the speed and confidence of his response made Sophia look more carefully at his posture. He sat perfectly still, his breathing controlled, his eyes already analyzing positions that were several moves in the future. "You seem comfortable with the game," she observed, developing her knight to attack his advanced pawn while simultaneously preparing to castle her king to safety. "I've played before," Alaric replied, bringing out his own knight in a move that was both defensive and subtly aggressive. "My daughter is learning the basics. It's a good way to teach patience and logical thinking." The mention of his daughter reminded Sophia of the human stakes underlying their seemingly casual contest. If she won, as expected, this man would return to his custodial duties with perhaps a small promotion as consolation. If he somehow managed to win an outcome she considered virtually impossible, his life would be transformed overnight. His daughter's future fundamentally altered by access to opportunities that steady professional employment could provide. For the first time since making her impulsive offer, Sophia felt a flicker of genuine pressure. This wasn't just an amusing way to pass time during a long evening at the office. It was a moment that could change another person's entire trajectory. The weight of that responsibility should have made her more cautious, but instead, it reinforced her determination to play her best chess and demonstrate the difference that years of serious study could make. She developed her bishop aggressively, targeting his kingside and preparing a classical attack that had served her well in countless previous games. The position was beginning to take on the familiar contours of her preferred style-controlled aggression, backed by solid positional understanding. Alaric's response surprised her with its sophistication. Instead of the passive defense she'd expected from a casual player, he launched his own bishop to a square that created immediate tactical complications. Suddenly the position required precise calculation rather than routine development, and Sophia found herself leaning forward to analyze possibilities she hadn't anticipated. "Interesting choice," she murmured, studying the board with increased respect for her opponent's tactical awareness. "Every move creates new possibilities," Alaric replied quietly. "Sometimes the most natural-looking moves are actually the most dangerous." His comment carried implications that extended beyond chess strategy, though Sophia was too focused on the emerging complications to consider alternative meanings. She was beginning to realize that Alaric's knowledge of the game was considerably deeper than his modest claims had suggested. His pieces moved with purpose and coordination, each development serving multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. 20 minutes into the game, Sophia acknowledged privately that she was facing a genuinely skilled opponent. Alaric's play demonstrated not just familiarity with chess principles, but an intuitive understanding of positional nuances that typically required years of serious study to develop. His moves flowed naturally from the position, each one improving his pieces while creating subtle problems for her own development. "Where did you learn to play like this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual while calculating the implications of his latest night maneuver. "Here and there," Alaric responded vaguely. "I had some good teachers when I was younger." The evasiveness of his answer frustrated Sophia, but she was too absorbed in the tactical complexities of the position to pursue the conversation further. Her carefully planned attack was meeting unexpected resistance, and she found herself having to recalculate variations she'd assumed would be straightforward. Alaric's style was becoming clearer with each move. He favored dynamic piece play over static positional advantages, creating tactical opportunities through active development rather than waiting for his opponent to make mistakes. His approach reminded her of the great attacking players she'd studied in chess literature, masters who could transform quiet positions into tactical maelstroms through sheer force of imagination. "Your move," he said softly, and Sophia realized she'd been staring at the board for nearly 5 minutes without making progress on her calculations. The position had evolved into something far more complex than she'd anticipated. What had begun as a straightforward demonstration of superior skill was becoming a genuine test of her chess understanding. Alaric's pieces occupied active squares, his king was safely castled, and his pawn structure provided both solidity and potential for future aggression. For the first time since making her reckless offer, Sophia began to consider the possibility that she might actually lose this game. The thought was both humbling and oddly exhilarating. When was the last time she'd faced genuine uncertainty about the outcome of any intellectual challenge? She made her move, a careful defensive gesture designed to consolidate her position while maintaining equality. But as Alaric immediately responded with a brilliant piece sacrifice that opened devastating lines of attack against her king, Sophia realized with growing alarm that she wasn't just facing a skilled amateur. She was facing someone who understood chess at a level that might well exceed her own expertise, someone whose modest demeanor had disguised a depth of knowledge that was only now becoming apparent as the game reached its critical phase. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the stakes infinitely higher, and Sophia Bennett found herself calculating not just chess moves, but the broader implications of having dramatically underestimated the quiet man sitting across from her with those penetrating dark eyes and those deceptively gentle hands that were systematically dismantling everything she thought she knew about intelligence, social class, and the nature of genuine mastery. The position on the board had transformed into something that made Sophia's pulse quicken with a mixture of excitement and growing dread. Alaric's peace sacrifice, a knight offered freely in exchange for attacking chances, had been the kind of intuitive move that separated masters from amateurs. She'd spent 8 minutes calculating whether to accept the sacrifice, her mind racing through variations that seemed to lead to increasingly dangerous complications. Against her better judgment, she'd taken the knight. The extra material should have given her a winning advantage, but as Alaric's remaining pieces swarmed toward her king with coordinated precision, Sophia began to understand that she'd walked directly into a trap of stunning sophistication. "Check," Alaric said quietly, his bishop finding a diagonal that seemed to appear from nowhere. Sophia stared at the board in disbelief. The bishop move wasn't just a check, it was the beginning of a forced sequence that would systematically destroy her position. She moved her king to the only available square, but even as she did so, she could see the walls closing in around her. "Check," he said again, a different piece this time. His rook had glided to a square that commanded both her king's retreat and her queen's protection. The attack was coming from multiple angles simultaneously, each checking move eliminating another possible defense. Her palms were actually sweating now, something that hadn't happened since her first major presentation to venture capitalists 6 years ago. The confidence that had carried her through countless boardroom negotiations was evaporating as she confronted the reality that she was being systematically outplayed by a man whose existence she'd barely acknowledged 20 minutes earlier. "This is impossible," she whispered, More to herself than to Alaric, but it wasn't impossible. It was happening with the inexorable logic of a perfectly executed plan. Alaric's moves flowed with a fluidity that spoke of deep pattern recognition, as though he were reading from a script that only he could see. Each piece found its optimal square, every capture and advance part of a larger symphony that was building toward an inevitable crescendo. "Check," he said for the third time, and Sophia realized with crystalline clarity that her position was hopeless. The final position was elegant in its brutality. Her king was trapped in a geometric pattern that offered no escape, surrounded by Alaric's pieces in a formation that seemed almost artistic in its precision. Every possible move led to immediate mate. Every defensive resource had been systematically eliminated. "Checkmate," Alaric announced, though his tone carried no triumph, only the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who had executed his art with perfect precision. Sophia sat in stunned silence, staring at the board as though willing the pieces to rearrange themselves into a position that made sense according to her understanding of how the world worked. The ivory king lay on its side where she'd tipped it in surrender, and somehow that small gesture felt like the most honest thing she'd done in years. 23 moves, she said finally, her voice carrying a brittleness she didn't recognize. "You checkmate me in 23 moves. 24, actually," Alaric corrected gently. "But who's counting?" The mild joke should have lightened the moment, but Sophia felt as though the foundation of her self-understanding had shifted beneath her feet. She'd built her entire identity around being the smartest person in every room, the strategic thinker who could analyze complex problems and emerge victorious through superior planning and execution. Yet here she sat, having been completely outmaneuvered by a man whose social status she dismissed without consideration. "You hustled me," she said, the words coming out sharper than intended. "You let me think you were just some casual player who happened to know how the pieces moved." Alaric began resetting the board with careful, practiced movements, each piece finding its starting square with the precision of ritual. "I never said I was casual," he replied evenly. "You assumed that because of what I do for work. There's a difference." The distinction hit her like a physical blow, forcing her to confront the casual arrogance that had led her to this moment. She'd looked at his custodial uniform and made assumptions about his intelligence, his background, his capabilities. The realization was uncomfortable, like discovering a blind spot in her peripheral vision that had been there all along. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, genuine curiosity overriding her wounded pride. "That wasn't luck or beginners. Fortune. You dismantled me systematically, like you'd seen this exact position before." Alaric finished placing the last pawn and looked up at her with those unsettling dark eyes. "I had some excellent teachers when I was younger," he said, and she caught something in his tone that suggested a story with depth she couldn't fathom. "Chess was my life once, before other things became more important." The phrase hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made her want to ask a dozen follow-up questions. But before she could form the words, Alaric was rising from his chair, pushing his cleaning cart toward the door with the same quiet efficiency that had brought him into her orbit. "Thank you for the game, Miss Bennett," he said formally. "I should finish my rounds." Sophia watched him leave, her mind churning with questions she didn't know how to ask. The conference room felt different now, smaller somehow, as if his presence had expanded the space, and his absence left it diminished. She looked down at the reset board, the pieces arranged in their eternal starting positions, and felt an unfamiliar hollow sensation in her chest. For the rest of the evening, she sat alone in her office, unable to concentrate on the quarterly projections that had seemed so important an hour earlier. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift to the chessboard, replaying the moves that had led to her devastating defeat. She tried to convince herself that losing a casual game to an employee didn't mean anything significant, that chess skill didn't necessarily correlate with intelligence or worth. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. The way Alaric had played, the depth of his combinations, the natural flow of his attacking sequences, the effortless way he'd navigated complex tactical situations spoke of genuine mastery that couldn't be faked or stumbled upon accidentally. She'd been beaten by someone who understood chess at a level that might well exceed her own capabilities, and that realization forced her to question every assumption she'd made about social hierarchies and intellectual worth. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the loss itself, but what it revealed about her own character. She'd been prepared to offer a token promotion to a worthy employee who might have provided her with an evening's entertainment. Instead, she'd encountered someone whose talents clearly warranted the position she'd casually offered, and possibly much more. As the city lights twinkled beyond her windows and the building settled into its late-night quiet, Sophia Bennett found herself thinking about the phrase that had haunted her since Alaric's departure. Chess was my life once, before other things became more important. What kind of other things could convince someone with that level of talent to abandon a pursuit they'd clearly mastered? And what did it say about her own values that she'd never considered there might be prizes in life worth more than professional achievement and social recognition? The questions followed her home that night, echoing in her mind as she lay in her empty penthouse apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering when she'd become the kind of person who measured human worth by job titles and social status rather than character and capability. For the next 4 days, Sophia found herself distracted during meetings, her attention wandering from budget reviews and product development sessions to thoughts of the quiet janitor who had humiliated her so thoroughly and so gracefully. It was her assistant's casual comment about updating employee performance records that provided the excuse she needed to investigate further. Personnel files are routine corporate due diligence, she told herself as she accessed the company's human resources database late Thursday evening, her executive privileges granting her access to employment records that would have been restricted to lower-level employees. Background verification is just good business practice. Alaric Beckett's file appeared on her screen with the mundane details she'd expected. 31 years old. Single father, 1 dependent daughter, clean driving record, no criminal history, employment references from previous custodial positions. The basic information painted a picture of reliable mediocrity, exactly what she'd assumed about him before their chess game had shattered her preconceptions. But buried in the employment history section was a single line that made her lean forward in her chair as though she'd received a physical shock. Previous occupation: professional chess player, USCF, rating 2,489. Her hands trembled as she cross-referenced that rating with the official United States Chess Federation databases. The numbers told a story that left her breathless with disbelief and something approaching awe. A rating of 2,489 didn't just indicate competence, it represented the upper echelons of chess mastery, the realm occupied by international masters and potential grandmasters. Sophia spent the next 3 hours falling down a rabbit hole of chess websites, tournament databases, and archived magazine articles. What she discovered there painted a picture so remarkable that she had to verify the information multiple times before accepting its reality. Alaric Beckett hadn't just been a professional chess player. He'd been a genuine prodigy, a teenage sensation who had dominated junior competitions throughout the late 2000s and early 2010s. Tournament reports from 15 years ago described him as brilliant and fearless, a tactical genius with an intuitive understanding of complex positions that reminded veteran commentators of the young Bobby Fischer. The deeper she dug, the more extraordinary his story became. International master at 17, just months away from earning his final grandmaster norm, when family tragedy had pulled him away from competitive play, precisely at the moment when he was reaching his peak potential. There were forum posts from chess enthusiasts wondering whatever happened to That Beckett guy who could have been the next great American champion. Speculation about a promising career cut short by mysterious circumstances. The mystery was solved. In a death certificate she found through public records, Maria Elena Beckett, age 24, died in a car accident on Interstate 280 during a winter storm. The date was 6 years ago, which meant Alaric had been caring for his dying girlfriend and an infant daughter when he'd walked away from professional chess forever. Sophia found herself staring at tournament photographs from his glory days, studying the intense young man with fierce concentration and confident posture, who seemed to inhabit a completely different universe from the quiet custodian she'd met. That version of Alaric Beckett had lived in a world of international travel and corporate sponsorships, magazine interviews and appearance fees that could have set him up for life. He'd traded all of it for health insurance and a steady paycheck, becoming invisible so his daughter could have stability and security. The magnitude of his sacrifice was staggering in its completeness. He'd given up not just a career, but an entire identity, transforming himself from a rising star into someone society barely noticed. One article particularly captured her attention. A feature story from Chess Life magazine titled Young Masters to Watch, published 8 years earlier. The accompanying photograph showed Alaric at 23, confident and polished in a tournament setting, his biography describing him as one of the most promising talents in American chess, with the tactical brilliance and competitive drive necessary for grandmaster success. The article included a quote that made Sophia's chest tighten with emotion. "Chess is beautiful because every position contains infinite possibilities. I want to spend my life exploring that infinity and sharing its beauty with others who love the game as much as I do." She tried to reconcile that ambitious young man with the quiet, dignity in hardship father who emptied her wastebaskets and mopped her floors while caring for his daughter. The transformation was so complete that she began to understand why no one at Bennett Technologies had recognized his background. He'd successfully erased his former self, becoming genuinely invisible in the way that only truly humble people could achieve. The weight of her earlier dismissiveness settled on her like a physical burden. She'd looked at his work clothes and his modest demeanor and assumed he was intellectually beneath her, never imagining that he'd sacrificed more than she'd ever achieved. The man who'd beaten her so effortlessly had been playing chess at the highest levels when she was still learning basic strategy in college. More than that, he'd given up greatness for love, something she'd never understood because she'd never loved anyone more than she loved success. The realization was humbling in ways that had nothing to do with chess and everything to do with her understanding of what really mattered in life. She found video footage of one of his final tournament games, played just months before his disappearance from competitive chess. Watching him play was like witnessing artistry in motion, every move flowing naturally from the last his pieces, coordinating with the kind of harmony that separated masters from merely strong players. The commentators spoke of him with genuine reverence, predicting a future filled with grandmaster titles and international recognition. "It's tragic," one commentator had said during the post-game analysis, "to think that economic pressures might drive talent like this away from professional chess. Beckett has the potential to represent the United States in world championship cycles, given the right support and opportunity." The irony wasn't lost on Sophia that she now had the power to provide exactly that kind of support and opportunity, if Alaric were willing to accept it. But as she continued reading about his background, she began to understand that the man who defeated her wasn't motivated by the same ambitions that drove her own relentless pursuit of success. The final piece of information that completed her understanding came from a small local newspaper article about a youth chess program Alaric had briefly taught during Isabella's early years. The reporter had asked him about his competitive background, and his response revealed everything about the choice he'd made. "Chess taught me to think strategically about what really matters. Sometimes the most important victories happen away from the board, in the quiet moments when you're building something more valuable than any title or rating. Sophia closed her laptop and sat in the darkness of her office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow compared to the depth of character she'd discovered in a man she'd casually dismissed. The penthouse apartment waiting for her at home, the luxury car in the executive parking garage, the recognition and influence she'd accumulated. None of it seemed as meaningful as the simple dignity with which Alaric Beckett had chosen love over ambition, family over fame, steady presence over spectacular achievement. For the first time in her adult life, she wondered if she'd been measuring success by the wrong metrics entirely. The following Monday arrived with the kind of crisp October morning that made San Francisco feel like the most beautiful city in the world. Sophia found herself arriving at the office earlier than usual, ostensibly to review quarterly projections, but secretly hoping to encounter Alaric during his morning shift. She'd spent the weekend thinking about their conversation, about the glimpses of depth and intelligence she'd witnessed beneath his humble exterior, and about the uncomfortable questions his story had raised about her own priorities and assumptions. She didn't have to wait long. At 7:30, she spotted him through her office windows, methodically cleaning the conference rooms with the same quiet efficiency she'd observed before. But now she noticed details that had previously escaped her attention. The way he handled expensive equipment with careful respect, the thoroughness with which he completed each task, the dignity he maintained despite performing work that others might consider beneath them. When he knocked on her office door, she felt a flutter of anticipation that surprised her with its intensity. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," he said, wheeling his cart into her office with practiced movements. "I hope you don't mind if I clean around you. I can come back later if you prefer." "Please, call me Sophia," she replied, gesturing for him to continue with his work. "And thank you again for the game last week. I've been thinking about it quite a bit." Alaric paused in emptying her wastebasket, studying her expression with those penetrating dark eyes. "It was my pleasure. You're a stronger player than you give yourself credit for. Your position was only truly lost in the final 10 moves." The generous assessment of her play touched something in Sophia that she hadn't expected. When was the last time someone had offered her genuine encouragement without agenda or ulterior motive? "I've been wondering," she continued carefully, "about your daughter. Isabella, wasn't it? What's she like?" The transformation in Alaric's face was immediate and profound. The carefully maintained professional demeanor melted away, replaced by a warmth and animation that made him seem like an entirely different person. "She's incredible," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable pride of a devoted parent. 6 years old, curious about everything, and fearless in ways that both amaze and terrify me. "Does she play chess?" Sophia asked, genuinely interested. "She's learning the basics," Alaric replied, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Though her approach to the game is rather unconventional. Last week she informed me that the queen should be able to jump over other pieces because queens are magical. And she created an entire elaborate story about why the pawns are actually secret princesses in disguise." The image of a 6-year-old reimagining chess through the lens of fairy tales charmed Sophia in ways she hadn't anticipated. "She sounds wonderful. It must be challenging, raising her on your own." Something flickered across Alaric's features, not pain exactly, but the shadow of old grief carefully managed. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me," he said simply. "Everything else is just logistics." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway, excited voices and the sound of rapid footsteps that suggested some kind of emergency or urgent development. Through her glass walls, Sophia could see several employees gathering around someone's computer screen, their expressions a mixture of concern and barely suppressed excitement. "Excuse me for a moment," she said to Alaric, stepping into the hallway. "To investigate." "Miss Bennett," called Jennifer, her assistant, hurrying over with a tablet in her hands. There's been a development with the Morrison account. They're threatening to pull their contract unless we can demonstrate significant progress on the natural language processing module by Friday. The Morrison account represented $12 million in annual revenue and served as a crucial reference for Bennett Technologies' expansion into enterprise artificial intelligence. Losing it would not only damage the company's financial position, but could trigger a domino effect among other major clients who were already expressing concerns about delivery timelines. Schedule an emergency meeting with the development team, Sophia instructed, her mind immediately shifting into crisis management mode. I want options and contingency plans within 2 hours. As Jennifer hurried away to organize the meeting, Sophia became aware that Alaric had followed her into the hallway and was listening to the conversation with obvious interest. She expected him to retreat discreetly, but instead he cleared his throat softly. "Forgive me for overstepping," he said, "but did I hear correctly that you're having difficulties with natural language processing algorithms?" Sophia paused, surprised by both his technical vocabulary and his willingness to insert himself into a conversation that was clearly above his professional pay grade. "Yes, we're struggling with contextual accuracy in complex customer service scenarios. The system works well for simple queries, but breaks down when customers use colloquial language or express multiple concerns simultaneously." Alaric nodded thoughtfully. "Have you considered implementing a multi-layered parsing system that treats conversational chess as a model for natural language interaction? The way humans communicate in complex scenarios actually follows many of the same strategic principles as chess. Each statement creates new possibilities while constraining others, and successful communication requires anticipating your partner's likely responses." The suggestion was sophisticated enough to make Sophia stop and consider its implications seriously. Chess as a model for natural language processing wasn't an approach her team had explored, but the theoretical framework made intuitive sense. Both domains involved pattern recognition, strategic thinking, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances based on incomplete information. "That's actually quite insightful," she said slowly. "Have you given much thought to artificial intelligence applications?" "I've always been interested in how humans think and learn," Alaric replied. "Chess taught me to recognize patterns and anticipate consequences, but raising Isabella has shown me how differently people can approach the same problem while still reaching valid solutions. It seems like the challenge in AI isn't just processing information quickly, but understanding the context and emotional subtext that humans take for granted." Before Sophia could respond, Jennifer returned with urgent information about the Morrison crisis, and Alaric discreetly withdrew to continue his cleaning duties. But his comments had planted a seed of possibility that continued growing throughout the demanding day of emergency meetings and strategic planning sessions. By evening, as she sat alone in her office reviewing the development team's proposed solutions, Sophia found herself thinking more about Alaric's casual insights than about the technical documents spread across her desk. His suggestion about chess-based language processing models wasn't just clever, it demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of both artificial intelligence principles and human psychology that went far beyond anything she'd expected from their custodial staff. The next morning, she made a decision that would have surprised her colleagues and probably violated several unwritten protocols about corporate hierarchy. Instead of waiting for Alaric to arrive for his cleaning shift, she sought him out in the building's basement maintenance office, a modest space filled with supplies and equipment that most executives never bothered to visit. She found him reviewing work schedules with 2 other custodial employees, his manner professional but warm as he discussed coverage for someone whose daughter was sick. The easy camaraderie and mutual respect evident in their interaction revealed another dimension of his character. This was someone whom people trusted and looked to for guidance, even in circumstances that offered no official authority or recognition. "Alaric," she said, feeling slightly foolish for interrupting but determined to follow through on her impulse. I wondered if you might have a few minutes to discuss that conversation we had yesterday about language processing. His colleagues looked surprised but not uncomfortable clearly. Alaric was the sort of person who generated respect rather than resentment when singled out for attention. Of course, he replied. Let me just finish here. They walked to a quiet corner of the building's lobby, where morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows and created an unexpectedly intimate atmosphere for their conversation. Sophia found herself nervous in a way that reminded her of job interviews during her early career, when the stakes felt enormously high and the outcome genuinely uncertain. I've been thinking about your suggestion, she began, and I'm curious whether you'd be interested in consulting with our development team on this project. Not as an employee, necessarily, but as someone with a unique perspective on pattern recognition and strategic thinking. Alaric was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an expression that seemed to weigh possibilities she couldn't guess at. That's generous of you, he said finally, but I should be clear about my limitations. I have responsibilities to Isabella that restrict my availability, and I can't compromise the stability that my current position provides. I understand completely, Sophia replied quickly. I'm thinking about something flexible, perhaps an hour or two in the evenings, after Isabella's bedtime, with compensation that would make it worthwhile without requiring you to change your primary employment. She could see him considering the offer, calculating not just the financial implications, but the broader questions of whether such an arrangement could work practically and professionally. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. As they prepared to part ways, Alaric hesitated. Sophia, he said, using her first name for the first time, would you like to meet Isabella? She's been asking questions about the lady from work who plays chess, and I think she'd enjoy meeting you. The invitation was completely unexpected and touched her in ways she struggled to articulate. When was the last time anyone had wanted to introduce her to their family, to share the most precious part of their life with someone they'd known for less than 2 weeks? I'd be honored, she replied, and meant it completely. That Saturday afternoon found Sophia standing outside a modest apartment building in the Richmond district, holding a small gift bag and feeling more nervous than she had before her first board presentation to venture capitalists. She'd chosen her clothing carefully casual enough to be approachable to a 6-year-old, but put together enough to show respect for the occasion. Alaric answered the door with Isabella beside him, a miniature version of her father with the same dark eyes and an expression of barely contained curiosity. The apartment behind them was small but warm, filled with Isabella's artwork and the comfortable clutter of a life lived with genuine love and attention. You must be Sophia, Isabella said with the formal politeness that young people sometimes employed when meeting important adults. Daddy says you're very good at chess. I thought I was, Sophia replied, crouching down to Isabella's eye level. But your father taught me that I still have a lot to learn. Isabella's face lit up with delight. Daddy's really good at chess. He used to be famous for it, but now he takes care of me instead. The matter-of-fact way Isabella described her father's sacrifice hit Sophia like a physical blow. To this 6-year-old, the most natural thing in the world was that her father had chosen her well-being over personal achievement, and she understood instinctively that this made him more rather than less admirable. That sounds like the best possible trade, Sophia replied, producing the gift bag she'd brought. I brought you something, if it's okay with your father. Inside was a beautiful wooden chess set, sized perfectly for small hands, with pieces carved to resemble fairy tale characters rather than traditional designs. Isabella gasped with genuine delight as she examined each piece, immediately beginning to create stories about the relationships between the different characters. The queen is the fairy godmother, she announced, and the knights are actually unicorns in disguise. And the pawns are all princesses who are just pretending to be regular people until it's time to save the kingdom. The three of them spent the afternoon playing Isabella's version of chess, which involved significantly more storytelling than strategy, but captured something essential about the joy and creativity that drew people to the game in the first place. Sophia found herself laughing more than she had in months, charmed by Isabella's innocent wisdom and the easy warmth of their family dynamic. As the day progressed, she began to understand why Alaric had made the choices he had. This wasn't just about providing for a dependent. This was about nurturing a bright, creative, loving person who would grow up knowing she was valued and protected. The apartment might be modest, but it was filled with the kind of security and affection that money couldn't purchase. When it came time to leave, Isabella hugged her goodbye with the unself-conscious affection that only young people could offer. "Will you come play chess with us again?" she asked. "I'd love to," Sophia replied, meaning it completely. Walking back to her car through the quiet residential streets, Sophia found herself thinking about the choices that had led her to this moment. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined spending a Saturday afternoon playing fairy tale chess with a custodial employee and his daughter. Now she couldn't imagine anything she'd rather be doing. For the first time in her adult life, she began to understand what Alaric had meant when he said that some victories happened away from the board, in the quiet moments when you built something more valuable than any title or rating. The Morrison crisis had been resolved through what the development team was now calling the Beckett Protocol, a natural language processing system that used chess-based pattern recognition to improve contextual understanding in customer service applications. Alaric's evening consulting sessions had proven invaluable, his unique perspective bridging the gap between theoretical computer science and practical human psychology in ways that impressed even the company's most skeptical senior engineers. Weeks after implementing the new system, Bennett Technologies had not only saved the Morrison account, but attracted interest from 3 additional enterprise clients who were intrigued by the innovative approach to artificial intelligence. The company's quarterly projections had improved dramatically, and Sophia found herself fielding calls from industry journalists who wanted to understand the breakthrough that was generating buzz throughout Silicon Valley. But the professional success felt secondary to the personal transformation that was occurring in her daily life. The evening consulting sessions had evolved into something that felt less like work and more like intellectual collaboration between equals, with Alaric's insights challenging her assumptions about technology, business, and human nature in ways that made her a better leader and thinker. More importantly, her growing friendship with Isabella had introduced her to a world of wonder and creativity that she'd forgotten existed. Their Saturday afternoon chess games had become a weekly tradition, with Isabella's storytelling approach to the game teaching Sophia to see possibilities she'd never noticed despite years of serious study. It was during one of these Saturday visits that Sophia made a decision that would test the foundation of everything they were building together. They were sitting in Alaric's modest living room, Isabella carefully arranging her fairy tale chess pieces in patterns that defied conventional strategy but created beautiful geometric designs, when Sophia broached the subject that had been occupying her thoughts for days. "Alaric," she said, carefully, "I've been thinking about your situation, and I have a proposition that might interest you." He looked up from the chess magazine he'd been reading, one of the few remaining connections to his former life, with an expression of polite attention that didn't quite hide his wariness about unexpected offers from wealthy executives. "The consulting work you've been doing has been extraordinary," Sophia continued. "Not just technically sound, but genuinely innovative in ways that could transform how we approach artificial intelligence applications. I'd like to offer you a position as our Director of Strategic Innovation, with a salary that would provide real security for you and Isabella." Isabella. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibilities and complications. Isabella continued playing with her chess pieces, unconsciously creating a buffer zone around their adult conversation while remaining close enough to overhear everything. "That's extremely generous," Alaric said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "But I should be clear about the practical limitations. I can't work traditional executive hours. Isabella's school schedule, her extracurricular activities, the simple reality of being a single parent, these things create constraints that most professional positions can't accommodate." Sophia had anticipated this objection and had spent considerable time developing solutions that would address his concerns while meeting the company's needs. "I've thought about that," she replied. "The position would be structured around flexible hours and remote work capabilities. Core collaboration time with the development team, strategic planning sessions, client presentations when necessary, but organized around your schedule rather than forcing you to adapt to conventional corporate expectations." She could see him considering the offer, weighing not just the financial implications, but the broader questions of whether such an arrangement could work practically and professionally. The opportunity represented a chance to return to meaningful, intellectual work while maintaining the stability and flexibility that Isabella required. The salary would be substantial, Sophia added. Enough to provide Isabella with educational opportunities, extracurricular programs, college savings, the kind of security that would eliminate financial anxiety while allowing you to focus on what you do best. Isabella looked up from her chess pieces with the sharp attention that youngsters paid to conversations about their future. "Would that mean we could stay in our apartment?" she asked, her 6-year-old mind immediately focusing on the most important question. "You could stay wherever makes you happiest," Sophia replied gently. "The goal would be to give you and your father more choices, not fewer." Alaric's response revealed the depth of his consideration for his daughter's well-being above all other factors. "Isabella, what do you think? Would you be okay if Daddy had a different kind of job that might sometimes mean working with computers instead of cleaning buildings?" Isabella's face scrunched up in concentration as she processed this question with the seriousness it deserved. "Would you still be home for dinner?" she asked. "Yes, absolutely," Alaric assured her. "Would you still help with my homework? Every night, would you still tell me stories before bed?" "All the best stories," he promised. Isabella nodded decisively. "Then I think it sounds good. But can Sophia still come play chess with us on Saturdays?" The innocent question hit Sophia with unexpected emotional force. In Isabella's mind, the continuation of their weekly chess games was apparently as important as the practical details of employment and financial security. The realization that this 6-year-old valued her presence enough to consider it a non-negotiable part of any arrangement touched something deep in Sophia's chest. "I would love to continue our Saturday chess games," Sophia replied, her voice slightly thick with emotion. "In fact, I was hoping we might be able to spend even more time together as a family." The word family had slipped out without conscious intention, but felt completely natural in the context of their conversation. Whatever was developing between the three of them had evolved beyond professional collaboration or casual friendship into something that resembled the domestic intimacy she'd never thought she wanted. Alaric's expression as he processed both her offer and her unconscious use of the word family was complex gratitude mixed with caution, hope tempered by the protective instincts of someone who'd learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. "This is incredibly generous, Sophia," he said slowly. "More generous than I have any right to expect or accept. But I need to understand the real motivations here. Is this about my consulting work, or is it about something else?" The directness of his question forced Sophia to confront feelings she'd been avoiding examining too closely. Her interest in offering Alaric this position went far beyond his professional capabilities, though those were genuinely impressive. She was drawn to him in ways that had nothing to do with chess or artificial intelligence and everything to do with the quiet dignity with which he navigated the world, The thoughtful way he raised his daughter, the glimpses of depth and intelligence that suggested possibilities she'd never considered. Both, she replied honestly. Your professional insights are genuinely valuable to the company, and this offer would be justified purely on business grounds. But I'd be lying if I said that was my only motivation. What are your other motivations? He asked, his tone suggesting that her answer would be crucial to his decision. Sophia glanced at Isabella, who was listening with the intense attention that youngsters paid to adult conversations that might affect their lives, then back at Alaric's penetrating dark eyes. I've learned more about what matters in life from spending time with you and Isabella than I did in the previous 10 years of professional success, she said quietly. I'd like the opportunity to continue learning if you're willing to teach me. The honesty of her response seemed to satisfy something in Alaric's evaluation. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as though trying to read intentions and possibilities that weren't entirely clear even to herself. Can I have some time to think about it? He asked finally. Of course, take all the time you need. But even as she said the words, Sophia knew that her feelings about the outcome went far beyond professional considerations. Somewhere in the process of offering Alaric this position, she'd realized that what she really wanted was not just to employ him, but to build a life with him and Isabella that honored both ambition and love, success and family, individual achievement, and shared purpose. The recognition of her own emotional investment should have been frightening for someone who'd spent her entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability. Instead, sitting in that modest living room, watching Isabella create art with chess pieces, while her father considered possibilities that could transform all their lives, Sophia found herself hoping for the first time that someone would choose her for reasons that had nothing to do with her professional accomplishments or social status. The next evening, as she sat alone in her penthouse apartment, surrounded by the trappings of success that had once seemed so important, Sophia realized that she was hoping Alaric would say yes, not because it would benefit Bennett Technologies, but because it would give her the chance to become part of the remarkable family they'd created together through love, sacrifice, and the simple decision to choose each other's well-being above their own individual ambitions. For the first time in her life, she understood what it might feel like to want something more than professional recognition or financial achievement. She wanted to belong somewhere that measured success in Saturday afternoon chess games and bedtime stories, in the quiet satisfaction of being chosen by people who valued character above status and love above everything else the world had to offer. The photograph appeared on TechCrunch's website on a Tuesday morning with a headline that made Sophia's coffee turn to ash in her mouth. Bennett Technologies CEO spotted in romantic chess match with company. Janitor corporate governance concerns raised. The accompanying image, clearly taken with a long-range lens through the windows of a downtown cafe, showed her and Alaric hunched over a chessboard in what appeared to be an intimate conversation, their heads close together in a way that suggested far more than a professional relationship. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and speculation, carefully constructed to avoid outright defamation, while painting a picture of improper relationships and questionable judgment. The anonymous source quoted throughout the piece seemed to have intimate knowledge of both Alaric's custodial employment and Sophia's recent decision to promote him to Director of Strategic Innovation, a decision that was characterized as highly irregular and potentially problematic from a corporate governance perspective. By noon, the story had been picked up by 3 major tech publications and was trending on social media with hashtags like #Chessgate and #Janitorgate that reduced their relationship to punchlines and memes. The comment sections were filled with speculation about Sophia's mental state, Alaric's motivations, and the broader implications for Bennett Technologies' corporate culture and leadership stability. Sophia first learned about the article when her assistant knocked on her office door with an expression that suggested incoming disaster. "Miss Bennett, Jennifer began carefully. "We have a situation developing that requires immediate attention. There's been some media coverage of your personal life that's generating discussion online." The blood drained from Sophia's face as she read the article, watching her moment of genuine happiness transformed into public spectacle. The comments were worse than the article itself, a toxic mixture of sexism and classism that reduced her to a caricature and dismissed Alaric as a gold digger seeking to exploit her wealth and position. "CEO having midlife crisis," read one highly upvoted comment. "Probably paying the janitor to make her feel special. This is what happens when women get too much power," added another. "They lose all judgment and start making decisions with their feelings instead of their brains. Poor guy is probably just trying to feed his kid," offered a third. "Can't blame him for taking advantage of a lonely rich lady who doesn't know any better." Each comment felt like a physical blow, not just because of their cruelty, but because of what they revealed about how the world saw her relationship with Alaric. Everything she'd come to value about their connection, the intellectual equality, the mutual respect, the genuine affection that had developed between them, was being reframed as either delusion or exploitation. Her phone rang constantly throughout the morning. Board members expressing concern about corporate image. Business partners making carefully worded inquiries about her judgment and mental state. Reporters from various publications hoping to transform workplace gossip into a larger story about executive impropriety and corporate governance failures. The worst call came from Richard Morrison, the client whose account had been saved through Alaric's innovative approach to natural language processing. "Sophia," he said without preamble, "I'm concerned about the media coverage this morning. Our board is asking questions about Bennett Technologies' leadership stability, and I need to be able to assure them that this situation won't affect our business relationship. Richard, this is personal media speculation that has nothing to do with our professional capabilities or the quality of our work," Sophia replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "Maybe so," Morrison replied coldly, "but perception matters in business. If Bennett Technologies becomes known for corporate drama rather than technical innovation, that affects our decision-making about future contracts." The implication was clear: their relationship with Alaric, which had directly contributed to solving Morrison's technical challenges, was now being characterized as a liability that could damage the very business success it had enabled. Similar conversations followed throughout the day, each one chipping away at Sophia's composure and forcing her to defend choices she wasn't sure she fully understood herself. By late afternoon, she felt as though she were drowning in a sea of judgment and speculation that threatened to destroy everything she'd built professionally while simultaneously undermining the personal happiness she'd only recently discovered. Final blow came when she encountered Alaric in the building's parking garage that evening. He was loading his car with personal items from his office, his face carefully blank in the way she'd learned to recognize as his method for dealing with situations that threatened his emotional equilibrium. "Are you leaving?" she asked, though the answer was obvious from his actions. "I think it's best for everyone," he replied without looking at her directly. "This morning's article has created exactly the kind of attention that Isabella and I can't afford. She's 6 years old, Sophia. She shouldn't have to deal with strangers taking photographs of her father or asking questions about our family life." The reasonableness of his concern only made the situation more painful. Sophia had been so focused on the professional implications of the media coverage that she hadn't considered how it might affect Isabella, whose only crime was having a father who'd attracted the attention of someone with a higher social profile. "The director position is still yours, if you want it," she said desperately. "We can restructure it as a remote consulting arrangement. Minimize your physical presence in the building until this dies down." Alaric finally looked at her directly, and she saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten with dread. "Sophia, Do you understand what this morning's article actually said about us? It's gossip and speculation, she replied quickly. Nobody with any sense takes this kind of tabloid journalism seriously. It said that I'm using you for money and professional advancement, Alaric continued quietly. It suggested that you're having some kind of breakdown that's affecting your business judgment. It characterized our relationship as inappropriate and potentially fraudulent. But we know that's not true, Sophia protested. Do we? Alaric asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I accepted a high-paying position from someone I'm personally involved with, which is exactly what they're suggesting happened. The brutal honesty of his self-assessment forced Sophia to confront implications she'd been avoiding. Her offer of the director position had been motivated by genuine professional respect for his capabilities, but it had also been driven by personal feelings that complicated the apparent objectivity of her business judgment. You earned that position, she said firmly. Your work on the Morrison account saved us millions of dollars and opened new business opportunities. The promotion was justified on purely professional grounds. Maybe, Alaric replied. But I can't prove that to the outside world, and neither can you. Which means that every future success will be tainted by questions about whether I deserved it, or whether I was given opportunities because of our personal relationship. The parking garage felt cavernous around them, filled with the echo of their voices and the weight of implications that neither of them knew how to resolve. Sophia could see the logic of Alaric's position, even as it broke her heart. He was protecting both his integrity and Isabella's well-being by removing himself from a situation that had become untenable through no fault of his own. What about our Saturday chess games? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Isabella's been asking questions about the people with cameras who were outside her school yesterday, Alaric replied. She wanted to know why strangers were interested in where she goes to school and who her friends are. I can't expose her to that kind of scrutiny. The realization that Isabella had already been affected by the media attention felt like a physical blow. The 6-year-old who had asked innocently about continuing their chess games was now dealing with the adult world's intrusion into her private life because her father had made the mistake of becoming involved with someone whose personal choices were considered public entertainment. I'm sorry, Sophia said, the words feeling inadequate to address the magnitude of what was being lost. I never intended for any of this to happen. I know, Alaric replied gently. But intention doesn't change the reality of the situation. He finished loading his car and closed the trunk with a finality that echoed through the parking garage like a door slamming shut. Take care of yourself, Sophia. You deserve better than this kind of public scrutiny, and so does Isabella. As he drove away, Sophia stood alone in the parking garage, surrounded by the luxury cars and executive privileges that had once seemed like symbols of success, but now felt like markers of isolation. For the first time since building Bennett Technologies, she wondered whether professional achievement was worth the price of personal happiness, and whether the public life she'd constructed around her business success would always make genuine human connection impossible. The media coverage continued for another week, generating increasingly creative speculation about her mental state and business judgment, before finally being displaced by newer scandals and corporate dramas. But the damage had been done, not just to her reputation, but to the fragile trust and intimacy that had been developing between three people who had found something precious together, before the outside world decided it was unacceptable. Standing in her empty penthouse apartment that evening, looking out at the city lights that had once seemed like a symbol of possibility and achievement, Sophia understood for the first time that some prices were too high to pay, even for success, and that the most important victories in life might be the ones that happened away from public scrutiny. In the quiet moments when people chose each other over everything else the world had to offer. 3 weeks had passed since Alaric's departure. From Bennett Technologies, 21 days that felt like an eternity to Sophia, as she navigated the hollow routine of professional success without the personal connection that had given her life meaning. The media attention had finally died down, replaced by newer scandals and corporate dramas, but the absence of Alaric and Isabella from her world felt like a physical ache that no amount of business achievement could heal. She'd thrown herself into work with renewed intensity, staying late to avoid the empty penthouse apartment that now felt more like a luxury prison than a symbol of accomplishment. The Morrison account was thriving. 3 new enterprise clients had signed contracts based on the innovative language processing system Alaric had helped develop, and Bennett Technologies' quarterly projections exceeded even their most optimistic forecasts. By every metric that had once mattered to her, she was more successful than ever, but success felt meaningless when she had no one to share it with. No Saturday afternoon chess games to look forward to, no Isabella's innocent laughter to brighten her weekends, no quiet conversations with Alaric that challenged her assumptions and made her want to be a better person. She'd gained professional recognition and lost the only relationship that had ever made her feel genuinely happy. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening as Sophia sat in her office reviewing acquisition proposals that could expand Bennett Technologies into new markets. Her assistant's number appeared on her personal phone, which was unusual enough to make her answer immediately. "Sophia, I'm sorry to call so late." Jennifer's voice was tight with worry. "But there's been an emergency." Alaric Beckett called the main company line because he didn't have your direct number. "His daughter is in the hospital, and he's asking if your insurance authorization is still valid for emergency medical care." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow, fear and adrenaline flooding her system as she processed the implications. Isabella was in the hospital. Alaric was reaching out to her despite everything that had happened between them. Something was seriously wrong, and the only thing that mattered was helping them through whatever crisis they were facing. "Where are they?" Sophia asked, already reaching for her keys and heading toward the elevator. "UCSF Medical Center, Pediatric Emergency Department," Jennifer replied. "He said something about Isabella having trouble breathing and the paramedics bringing her in about an hour ago." Sophia was in her car before Jennifer finished speaking, racing through the empty streets of downtown San Francisco, with a desperation that had nothing to do with speed limits or traffic laws, and everything to do with getting to Isabella as quickly as possible. The fear that gripped her chest was unlike anything she'd experienced in her professional life. This wasn't about quarterly projections or board meetings or corporate reputation. This was about a 6-year-old girl who had become more precious to her than any business achievement, and the man who had trusted her enough to call when his world was falling apart. The Pediatric Emergency Department at UCSF Medical Center was a controlled chaos of medical professionals, worried parents, and the particular mixture of hope and despair that hospitals cultivated in their waiting areas. Sophia found Alaric in the family consultation room, still wearing the custodial uniform from his new job at a downtown office building, his face drawn with exhaustion and terror that made her heart break. "What happened?" she asked without preamble, crossing the room to sit beside him with the natural intimacy of someone who had shared Saturday afternoons and quiet conversations and the gradual building of something that felt like family. "Asthma attack," Alaric said, his voice hoarse with strain. "But different from anything we've dealt with before. Severe bronchospasm, oxygen saturation dropping dangerously low." The paramedic said another 10 minutes, and he couldn't finish the sentence, the implications too terrible to voice. Sophia reached for his hand instinctively, offering the only comfort she could provide in a situation where money and influence meant nothing compared to medical expertise and Isabella's own strength. "How is she now?" "Stable, responding to the nebulizer treatments and oxygen therapy. But the doctors want to run additional tests, possibly keep her for observation. The problem is..." Alaric's voice trailed off, and Sophia could see the weight of practical concerns adding to his emotional distress. "Insurance," she said, understanding immediately. "Your new job doesn't have the same coverage. The emergency care is covered, but the specialized testing they're recommending, the potential overnight stay, the follow-up appointments with pulmonology specialists, it's all going to be out of network. I can't afford to deny Isabella the care she needs, but I also can't take on debt that would compromise our housing stability." The desperation in his voice revealed the impossible calculations that parents without resources were forced to make, choosing between their youngsters' immediate medical needs and their family's long-term financial security. Sophia had never had to make such choices, had always assumed that good medical care was simply a matter of finding the right doctors and paying whatever was required. "Don't worry about the costs," she said firmly. "I'll handle all the medical expenses, whatever Isabella needs. The only thing that matters is making sure she gets the best possible care." Alaric looked at her with an expression that cycled through gratitude, relief, and something that might have been love if circumstances had been different. "Sophia, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," she interrupted. "I'm offering." "Isabella." "Isa." She paused, searching for words that could capture the depth of her feelings for this remarkable little girl who had taught her about joy and creativity and the simple pleasure of being chosen by someone who valued character over achievement. "She's family to me. Family takes care of each other." Before Alaric could respond, a doctor in pediatric scrubs entered the consultation room with the brisk efficiency of someone delivering important information. "Mr. Beckett? I'm Dr. Sarah Chun, Isabella's attending physician. She's doing much better. Oxygen levels have stabilized, and she's responding well to the bronchodilator treatments." The relief that flooded Alaric's face was so profound that Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. This was what real fear looked like, what genuine love demanded, the complete subordination of every other concern to the well-being of someone whose life mattered more than your own. "Can I see her?" Alaric asked. "Of course. She's been asking for you, and for someone named Sophia. She seems to think you're both coming to play chess with her when she feels better." The innocent expectation in Isabella's request that Sophia would naturally be there during a family crisis, that chess games would resume once the medical emergency was resolved, hit both adults with equal force. Despite everything that had happened between them, Isabella still considered Sophia part of their family, still expected her presence during the most frightening experience of her young life. They followed Dr. Chun through the maze of medical equipment and monitoring stations to Isabella's room, where the 6-year-old lay surrounded by machines that measured her breathing and oxygen levels. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, but her eyes lit up when she saw them both entering together. "Daddy," she said, her voice slightly hoarse, but filled with the resilient joy that had made Sophia fall in love with this remarkable little girl. "Sophia, I knew you would both come. The nurse said I might have to stay overnight, and I was worried about our chess game on Saturday." The matter-of-fact way Isabella discussed her hospitalization and her immediate concern about their weekly chess tradition revealed everything about her priorities and the security she felt, knowing that the adults in her life would take care of whatever needed to be taken care of. She wasn't worried about medical costs or insurance coverage or the complex adult emotions that had driven her father and Sophia apart. She was worried about chess games and the continuation of relationships that made her feel safe and loved. "We'll figure out the chess games," Sophia said gently, settling into the chair beside Isabella's bed. "The most important thing is making sure you can breathe easily and feel strong again." "I brought something," Isabella announced, producing a small wooden chess piece from beneath her hospital blanket, the fairy godmother queen from the set Sophia had given her. "I thought if I held on to the queen, she could help protect me while the doctors make me better." The image of Isabella clutching a chess piece for comfort during her medical crisis was almost more than Sophia could bear emotionally. This 6-year-old had taken a symbol of their shared relationship and transformed it into a talisman of hope and protection, carrying a physical reminder of their connection even when circumstances had separated them. "That's very smart thinking," Sophia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Queens are excellent at protecting the people they care about." As the evening progressed, with Isabella drifting in and out of sleep while her oxygen levels gradually improved, Sophia and Alaric found themselves keeping vigil together in the way that only shared love for someone else could enable. The conversation was quiet and intermittent, focused entirely on Isabella's comfort and recovery, but the easy intimacy of their collaboration revealed how naturally they functioned as a team when external pressures were stripped away. "The doctors say she needs follow-up care with a pediatric pulmonologist," Alaric said during one of Isabella's sleeping periods. "Medication adjustments, possibly environmental assessments of our apartment, long-term management strategies for preventing future attacks." "Whatever she needs," Sophia replied without hesitation. Cost is not a factor in Isabella's medical care ever. Alaric was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim hospital lighting. "Why are you doing this? After everything that happened, after the way I left, why are you here taking care of us?" The question forced Sophia to articulate feelings she'd been avoiding examining too closely. "Because I love her," she said simply. "And because I love you. Because the 3 weeks since you've been gone have been the emptiest of my life. And because sitting in this hospital room worrying about Isabella has been more meaningful than anything I've accomplished professionally in the past year. The media attention, the board pressure, the questions about your judgment don't matter," Sophia interrupted. "None of it matters compared to this. Compared to being here when you needed help. Compared to making sure Isabella gets the medical care she deserves. Compared to the possibility that we might be able to rebuild what we had before the outside world decided it was unacceptable." As dawn broke through the hospital windows, painting Isabella's room in soft golden light, the little girl stirred awake and looked at both adults with the clear-eyed perception that youngsters sometimes possessed in moments of importance. "Are you going to get married?" she asked with the directness that only 6-year-olds could manage. "Because I've been thinking about it, and I think it would be good if we could all live together and play chess whenever we want instead of just on Saturdays." The innocence of her question, delivered in a hospital room while medical equipment monitored her breathing, crystallized everything that had been building between them throughout the long night of crisis and collaboration. Isabella wasn't concerned about corporate governance or media speculation or the complex adult emotions that had driven them apart. She wanted the security and joy that came from being part of a family that chose to stay together. Looking at Alaric across Isabella's hospital bed, Sophia realized that the crisis had stripped away everything except what really mattered: their love for Isabella, their growing love for each other, and the simple truth that some things were more important than public opinion or professional reputation or the narrow definitions of success that had once seemed so crucial. "I think," Sophia said carefully, "that's something your father and I should talk about very seriously." 6 months later, the boardroom of Bennett Technologies buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with quarterly projections or market analysis. Instead, the glass-walled conference room overlooked a scene that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Sophia Bennett, CEO and founder, was teaching a chess lesson to a group of employees' youngsters during the company's inaugural Bring Your Family to Work Day. Isabella sat at the head of the table, her breathing completely normal thanks to the new medication regimen prescribed by Dr. Chun and the comprehensive environmental modifications Sophia had made to both the office building and their new shared home in Pacific Heights. At 7 years old now, Isabella had appointed herself as the official assistant chess instructor, helping younger participants understand the rules, while narrating elaborate stories about the pieces that transform tactical lessons into imaginative adventures. The queen can move anywhere she wants, Isabella explained to 5-year-old Marcus, whose mother worked in Bennett Technologies' accounting department, because she's magic and she protects everyone on the board. But she's also really smart, so she thinks carefully before making big moves. Sophia watched this impromptu lesson with the same wonder she'd felt during those first Saturday afternoon games in Alaric's modest apartment. Isabella's approach to chess remained wonderfully unconventional, less concerned with winning than with creativity, more interested in the stories the pieces could tell than in memorizing tactical patterns. Yet somehow, through her innocent wisdom, she'd helped both adults understand that the most beautiful games were the ones played for love rather than victory. "Your move, Sophia," said Alaric, who was analyzing a position on the demonstration board they'd set up for the more advanced players. His title as Director of Strategic Innovation had been restructured to accommodate flexible scheduling and family priorities, turning what could have been a traditional corporate role into something that honored both professional excellence and personal values. The 6 months since Isabella's hospitalization had transformed Bennett Technologies in ways that extended far beyond personnel changes. Sophia's decision to prioritize work-life balance and family-friendly policies had initially concerned some board members, but the results spoke for themselves. Employee satisfaction had increased dramatically. Productivity was at an all-time high, and the company's reputation for innovation had attracted talent from across Silicon Valley. More importantly, the changes had attracted a new kind of client, companies that valued ethical leadership and sustainable business practices over purely profit-driven approaches. The Beckett Protocol that had saved the Morrison account had evolved into a comprehensive artificial intelligence platform that prioritized human dignity and emotional intelligence, establishing Bennett Technologies as a leader in responsible AI development. "I'm thinking," Sophia replied, studying the board while simultaneously monitoring the room full of families who had become part of their extended corporate community. "Isabella, what do you think about this position?" Isabella abandoned her lesson with Marcus and scampered over to examine the demonstration board with the serious concentration she brought to all chess-related discussions. "The white queen looks lonely," she observed. "Maybe she needs to find a way to work better with the other pieces instead of trying to do everything by herself." The innocent assessment hit both adults with its accuracy. The position on the board mirrored the isolation that had once characterized Sophia's approach to both chess and life, brilliant individual moves that lacked the coordination and mutual support that created truly beautiful games. "You're absolutely right," Sophia said, making a move that brought her queen into harmony with her other pieces, rather than pursuing a solitary attack. "Sometimes the strongest move is the one that helps everyone work together." The afternoon chess lesson was interrupted by a gentle knock on the conference room door. Jennifer, Sophia's assistant, entered with an expression that suggested something requiring immediate attention. "Miss Bennett," she said quietly, "there are some reporters here from TechCrunch and Forbes. They're asking about the family-friendly workplace initiatives and wanting to discuss your unconventional approach to corporate leadership. Should I schedule interviews for later this week?" The mention of media attention created a moment of tension that rippled through the room. 6 months ago, press attention had nearly destroyed the relationship that had become the foundation of Sophia's happiness. The question now was whether they were strong enough to handle public scrutiny on their own terms, rather than allowing others to define their story. Sophia looked at Alaric, who nodded with the quiet confidence that had carried them through months of rebuilding trust and redefining their priorities. Isabella, oblivious to the adult concerns swirling around her, continued arranging chess pieces in patterns that pleased her artistic sensibilities. "Tell them we'd be happy to discuss Bennett Technologies' commitment to family-centered workplace policies," Sophia replied. "But make it clear that any interviews will focus on business practices and company culture, not personal relationships or family matters. Our private life remains private." As Jennifer departed to manage the media requests, Sophia felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with professional recognition and everything to do with the boundaries they'd learned to establish. The outside world could speculate about their choices, but they would control their own narrative and protect what mattered most. "Daddy," Isabella said, tugging on Alaric's sleeve with the urgency that youngsters brought to important announcements. "I need to ask Sophia something." "What's that, sweetheart?" Sophia replied, crouching down to Isabella's eye level with the attention that had become natural after months of sharing parenting responsibilities. Isabella's face scrunched up in the expression she wore when grappling with complex ideas that required careful articulation. At school, Emma Martinez said that her mommy and daddy got married because they love each other and want to live together forever. And I told her that you and daddy love each other too, and we all live together in the big house with the garden, where I can play chess outside when it's sunny. Sophia felt her heart rate accelerate as she sensed the direction of Isabella's reasoning. Around them, the family chess lesson continued, parents and young people absorbed in their games, but she was completely focused on the 7-year-old, who had become the center of her universe. "Emma asked me why you and daddy aren't married if you love each other like her parents do." Isabella continued with the logical persistence that had made her such a formidable chess student. And I didn't know what to tell her. The conference room seemed to pause around them, though Sophia knew that was impossible. Other families continued their chess games. Conversation flowed naturally, and the afternoon sun continued streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But for her, everything had narrowed to this moment, this question, this 7-year-old girl who was about to voice the inquiry that would define their future. Isabella took a deep breath and looked directly at Sophia with those dark eyes that were so much like her father's. "Mommy," she said, using the title that had evolved naturally over months of shared bedtime stories and homework, help in quiet conversations about everything from chess strategy to playground politics. "Why won't you marry the nice janitor?" The question hung in the air with all the innocent directness that had made Isabella such a catalyst for change in both their lives. She wasn't asking about corporate governance or social expectations, or the complex adult emotions that had once seemed so important. She was asking why two people who loved each other and had built a family together weren't making the commitment that would ensure their togetherness forever. Sophia glanced at Alaric, who was watching her with an expression that mixed hope with patient understanding. He'd never pressured her about marriage, never suggested that their unconventional arrangement needed conventional validation, but she could see in his eyes that Isabella's question touched something deep in his own heart, the desire for permanence, for security, for the kind of commitment that would guarantee their family's future, regardless of external pressures. "Isabella," Sophia said carefully, "what makes you think I should marry your father?" "Because you make him smile the way Mommy used to," Isabella replied with the matter-of-fact wisdom that had consistently surprised the adults in her life. "And because you help me with my homework and read stories and play chess, and you take care of us when I'm sick. And because when you're all together, everything feels safe and happy." The simple enumeration of domestic happiness, homework help, bedtime stories, shared chess games, medical care during emergencies captured everything that marriage was supposed to represent, but that Sophia had never understood until now. Isabella wasn't talking about legal contracts or social recognition. She was talking about the daily choice to build a life together, based on love and mutual care, and the simple pleasure of choosing each other repeatedly. "You know what, Isabella?" Sophia said, feeling a clarity that had nothing to do with strategic planning and everything to do with listening to the wisdom of someone who understood what really mattered. "I think you're absolutely right." She stood and walked to where Alaric was still analyzing the demonstration board, his attention divided between chess tactics and the conversation that was reshaping their future. "Alaric Beckett," she said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, Would you be willing to marry a CEO who's still learning how to balance chess pieces and life priorities? The room erupted in applause and laughter as Bennett Technologies employees and their families realized they were witnessing a proposal that had been building for months, through shared chess games and family dinners and the gradual recognition that some partnerships were worth more than any individual achievement. Alaric's response was everything Sophia had hoped for and more. Instead of words, he captured her hand and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promises and new beginnings, and the kind of future that honored both love and ambition without requiring either to be sacrificed for the other. Yes, he said when they finally broke apart, but only if you promise that our wedding will include a chess tournament and that Isabella can be both flower girl and tournament director. Deal, Sophia replied, pulling Isabella into a hug that encompassed their entire unconventional family. But I get to design the wedding chess sets. As the celebration continued around them, with Bennett Technologies employees taking photos and Isabella already planning elaborate wedding chess ceremonies, Sophia realized that this was what victory looked like when you played for the right stakes. Not the solitary triumph of individual achievement, but the collaborative joy of building something beautiful with people who chose to stay. Piece by careful piece, move by thoughtful move. The late afternoon sun streamed through the conference room windows, casting long shadows across the chessboards where families continued their games. But for Sophia Bennett, soon to be Sophia Beckett, the most important game had already been won. Played out not in the movement of carved pieces across 64 squares, but in the daily choice to love and be loved, to prioritize relationships over recognition, and to understand that the greatest victories happened when everyone won together. 6 months later, their wedding reception was held in the same conference room where Isabella had asked her life-changing question. Chessboards were stationed throughout the venue, and guests played games between dinner courses while Isabella, now 8 years old and the official wedding chess coordinator, supervised tournaments and told stories about magical queens who learned that the most powerful moves were the ones that brought everyone closer together. The final scene of their story unfolded exactly where it had begun, in the 32nd floor conference room of Bennett Technologies, with chess pieces arranged on the board and the San Francisco skyline twinkling beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. But now the room was filled with laughter and love and the comfortable chaos of a life shared by 3 people who had learned that the most beautiful games were the ones played for joy rather than victory, for connection rather than conquest, for the simple pleasure of choosing each other one move at a time. As Sophia and Alaric analyzed their latest game while Isabella added her own creative flourishes to the position, they understood that they had found something more valuable than any individual achievement. They had built a family that measured success in shared happiness, daily kindness, and the endless possibilities that opened up when people chose love over everything else the world had to offer. The chess pieces sat patiently on their squares, ready for whatever games tomorrow might bring. But the real victory was already complete, played out in bedtime stories and Saturday afternoons, in hospital vigils and wedding celebrations, in the quiet moments when 3 people looked at each other and knew, beyond any doubt, that they had chosen correctly, that they belonged together, and that the most important moves in life happened away from any board, in the simple act of building something beautiful together, one day at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from US.